If you've got a Bible or tablet, please open it at Ephesians chapter 3. If you're using the Brown Church Bible, that's page 1227. And I just want to read a few verses from Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus. So the section I'm reading is from verse 14 to verse 20 of Ephesians chapter 3. It's entitled here, A Prayer for the Ephesians. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom his whole family in heaven and earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your heart through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. If you'd like to turn to Ephesians chapter 3, when I agreed to cover these two successive Sundays with Calix taking his long summer holiday, I thought it would be nice to perhaps try and link the messages, and my thoughts centred on Ephesians chapter 3. Since then, Steve contacted me and said, could I take a date in September as well? So it may well be that I try and link that in as well. But the two messages I have in mind for this week and next week focus on verses 20 and 21. And today I want us to focus on what I've called one of God's core competencies. Just as Simon referred to the term orphanage isn't being used at Childcare Centre, one of God's attributes is the way we would have described it 20 years ago. I've just picked modern jargon and called it core competencies. So one of God's core competencies, and that is his immeasurable ability. That's what we find here in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20. Now, to him who is able to do immeasurably more. Immeasurably more. And really the theme for this morning is a simple one. You can sum it up in 3 words, and that is, God is able. God is able. But, and you knew there was a but coming, didn't you? Do we believe that? And do we live that? Do we believe that God is able? And do we live our lives in a way that means that we're a channel for him to be like that? Do we worship as a fellowship like that? Or do we tend to live more in a routine or in a pattern, in a box, if you like, and we try to almost make God fit with what we want, how we are? After all, if we allow God to challenge us too much, that could be uncomfortable. That could be very uncomfortable. He could call us to do things that we wouldn't naturally want to do. Are we allowed to let his power, as it were, run through our veins and direct us? Or are we imposing, keeping the electrical illustration, circuit breakers that we flick to control and to constrain that? And as I was preparing, I've got 3 little headings for us this morning. Unfortunately, with not being around near a computer, I haven't produced any overhead to go with it. I'll try and get one done for next week. But the first is that there is power above us. The second, that there is power within us. And thirdly, that there is power through us. So first of all, there is power above us. And my mind went to that song, and I nearly suggested it this morning, which we often sing, and we normally sing it as a second song. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. I'm not going to try and do the actions along with it, because I can never remember the big. I think the big is that, isn't it? The strong is that. No, I don't know. Big, strong, mighty, mighty. So, okay, yeah. Big, strong, mighty. Okay. And we sing it. But do we really believe it? Do we believe those words? Or is it, oh, that's for the children. That's a nice song for the children. It sort of summarizes God's power. But that's a bit simplistic. He wouldn't really do anything powerful in that sort of way in our lives or in front of us. But he can. And you know, sometimes I think I enjoy singing some of these songs because they perhaps remind us in simple language of a truths we need to be aware of. My friends, don't be afraid to look at the words you're singing often, because you know the words that you get up behind here have not just been composed willy-nilly. They've been very thoughtfully thought through. That's bad English, isn't it? Thoughtfully thought through. You know, and they contain so many truths. And often, some of the songs we sing with our younger people just really do put that right in front of your eyes in a way that's particularly meaningful. Now, in an age before there were computers and DVDs and Blu-ray, or even VHS, people still with me? And you go back further, and I go back to the times of Enid Blyton books, Enid Blyton books and comics. Still got people with me, the Dandy, Beano, yeah. So my apologies to those under the age of 25 here who haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, have you? Other than, oh, those are the old collector's things you can buy on eBay, is it? Those sorts of things. It's true, isn't it? Well, I used to love going down to our local shop, like your local corner shop in the village where I was brought up, where you would walk in and the person who owned it knew everyone in the village, and he would walk in and say, okay, Mr. Rolo, are you going to have your packet of Rolos and have you got your pocket money? Packet of Rolos and a Beano, isn't it? And he would know what I would collect every Saturday from him. And on one occasion, that they'd started to include adverts in the Beano, and there was an advert for these X-ray sunglasses that you could buy. I think they were 4 shillings and sixpence from memory at the time. That does date me, doesn't it? 4 shillings, sixpence, I'm trying to work that, what's that now? Is that 12.5 pence? 12.5 pence in modern money. Now, my weekly pocket money was nothing like that. So with some car washing and some saving up over a number of weeks, I finally got to the point where I could afford to buy these X-ray sunglasses. So my mother took me down to the local post office. I duly paid my cash and got something called a postal order. Remember those? Yeah. Yeah, no deal on eBay or contactless, or Bethan joined us in France and was paying for things using their phone. I haven't got into that sort of stuff yet, but so there I was, postal order goes off. It said it would take 4 to 10 weeks for delivery. It certainly wasn't 4 weeks, it must have been 10 weeks or longer, because I'd completely forgotten about these X-ray sunglasses until the package arrived. My name was misspelt on the envelope. I was disappointed. I should instead have embraced that as a lesson, because the number of times our surname gets misspelt now is constant. So there was a little. And finally, I opened this packaging. And I remember the frames. The frames were a sort of pink colour. They were plastic. The bits that went round the ear didn't really fit properly. They were really tight. And then inside the frame, you had, well, it was like a very tough coloured paper. It was like a sort of purpley colour. It's very similar actually to Jill's skirt there, as I recall the colour of these. So I got them out and I put them on and I put my hand up and I could still see the whole of my hand. And I thought, probably doesn't work indoors with art. It probably needs to be outside with proper lighting. So I went outside and I tried again to look, because I was expecting to see just the skeleton of my hand as I could properly see X-ray eyes through things. Didn't work. It did not work. I was so disappointed. In fact, I was so disappointed that 46 years on, I am so scarred by the experience. You can hear it in my voice now. The intensity with which I tell the story today of those pair of X-ray sunglasses that didn't do what they were supposed to do 46 years ago. Again, there's a lesson in life there. How many things have I bought over the last 46 years that haven't quite done what it said they would do? So I'm not going to digress. But that was perhaps one of the first experiences I had of the disappointment of getting less than I was expecting. But with God, I've always got more than I expected. With him, my friends, I've always had more than I've expected. That doesn't mean I've always wanted more. That doesn't mean at the time I've always appreciated more. More has often been different. Different has not necessarily been comfortable. But our God gives us so much more than we could ever believe possible. And here the Apostle Paul, in writing to this church in Ephesus, was trying to communicate that fact to them. He was trying to get across to the message that however you open your mind, however much you try to suspend human reason and logic and constraint, our God is bigger than even that. Here in the NIV, I think, to be honest, that's been diluted slightly in the language here. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more. That's good prose, isn't it? Immeasurably more. It flows well, but it sort of is somewhat contained. If you go back to I think the authorized version here, is a much better translation if you compare that with the original Greek, because in the authorized it says, now to him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. Now you might sit there and think, exceeding abundantly, that's really poor English. That's two words being used where only one is necessary. Exceedingly more, or abundantly more, but why is he saying, why have the translators gone for exceedingly abundantly above? Well, the reason they've done that is if you go back to the original Greek language in the way that Paul wrote this letter, Paul uses this double compounded word. It's as if Paul is saying, when he's trying to communicate the bigness and the awesomeness of God, he's created this new phrase to make his point. He's saying, look, our God is incredibly incredible. Or if you like the word awesome, our God is awesomely awesome. If you like amazing, our God is amazingly amazing. Or he's fantastically fantastic. Or he's infinitely infinite. Do you get the pattern? And that's really what Paul was doing as he wrote to the Ephesians here. in talking about this God who is above and the power that is above us, he was making the point that it's almost impossible to put into a sentence how big our God is, to describe how powerful he is. Because he's able to do, as we've got in the NIV here, immeasurably more. So, my friends, let's make sure we're unpacking those words. When we read them, it's easy words to read. It's easy to read on the eye, and you flow through the rest of that verse. But when God is talking about immeasurably more, when Paul is talking about immeasurably more, he really does mean that our God can exceed our wildest expectations. His power is not limited. And sometimes I think we lose a sense of that. There are no boundaries to his love, no limits, no fences, no gates, no containers. He is not constrained. I think we constrain him on times. We constrain him in our faithfulness. We constrain him perhaps in our willingness. There are points where part of us wants to go forward and part of it is sort of fighting that and holding back. But as we start to look at these two verses, there is power above us. But secondly, there is power within us as well. So if power above us is now to him, who is able to do immeasurably more, then as we look at it at this verse 20 again, there is power within us, according to his power that is at work where? Within us. There is power within us. You see, he's able to do, as Paul says, so much more than we ask or think. If you want again to go back to the root of this word power that's used here, and the phraseology of verse 20 here, the word that's translated power here, another way to translate it would be similar to the word like dynamite. That's what Paul is trying to convey here, almost the explosive nature of the power of our God, and that power, that is at work within us. I don't know. I'm sure you have had the same experience I've had when perhaps you've been in the kitchen going to do something, and you've plugged in a device that you need to use. Maybe it's a food blender or something, and you put everything together. And you've pressed the start button and nothing happens. And it's all there. Everything you need is there, but it's not in the form you want it. And you shake your head and you think you shouldn't have bought such a cheap one. These things burn out too quickly. And then you realise that the switch next to the plug on the wall is still off. So you turn the switch on and you go back and you press the button. And there you are. Everything is minced up immediately for you. Sometimes, I think we need to be willing to let that power within us be released. Check that the button is on, that the circuits are open, and that we allow God's power to work through us. Power is of no value unless the appliance is turned on. And equally, if the appliance is on and there is no power, as I was explaining earlier in the service, as we found this week, nothing happens. God's power is there for us. My friends, God's power is there. It can be an uncomfortable experience, but are we engaging with him? Paul in verse 16 here, in the build-up to this summary in verses 20 and 21 says this: I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. That's the key, really. If you're looking at verses 20 and 21, which sums it all up, and thinking, well, that isn't for me. How could that possibly apply to me? Why is Kevin talking about the need for us to be willing to embrace and let God's power flow through us? How do we do that in practice? Then in verse 16 here, Paul is giving us a key to that. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you. It's not something we do ourselves. You know, the best, most intelligent food mixer that you could possibly buy will not do what it wants for you, even if you put the ingredients in, unless it has power. Do we allow ourselves to be used by him? Do we allow God's power to go through us? Or let's put it in biblical language here. Do we allow ourselves to be strengthened with his power? Do we allow ourselves to be strengthened through his power? It's not easy, and it can be frightening. But that's what we're promised here. So there is power above us, and there is power within us. But what this passage is also hinting about, and verse 20 again picks that up, is that thirdly, there is power through us. If God is in us, if God's power is in us, and he is working, then there is power through us, through our lives. Whether we're in the middle of problems and difficulties, whether we're experiencing some great joy, whatever it is, God's power works in us. When Judy and I got back yesterday, I knew the first job I had to do was attend to the lack of water on the first floor in our house. Nigel had been around while I was away. We'd got this message. There was no cold water on the first floor in the house. You open all the taps, nothing. There was water coming out of the downstairs taps. There was water in the loft. Not literally in the loft, you know what I mean? The gravity-fed tank was there, but there was nothing coming out of any of the cold water taps, basins or baths on the first floor, and there hadn't been for a week. Made for an interesting experience. You could only use the toilet downstairs. So we called our night mate Nigel. Nigel came around. Did you sort it, Nigel? No. Banged his head, scraped his head in the process, climbing in the loft, and gave us the telephone number of somebody else to try and restore the water. So having got back with the benefit of 2 short YouTube clips, I felt a home plumbing expert coming on. These things can be disaster, by the way, if you get them wrong. But it was suggested that if you have got an air block, which we clearly had, and just opening the lowest tap doesn't lead to the air coming out, you need to force the air out with mains supply water. So there I was. I don't quite know what Judy thought yesterday morning when I connected up mains cold water to the bath mixer tap, held it open, and my philosophy was, let's try and blast cold water at a higher pressure in. Let's open another tap further up so that hopefully the air comes out of that tap and then the water starts coming. And when that happens, go and open another tap. So we were running up and down on the first floor, opening taps, and there was a hissing sound and air came out, and finally spluttering water, and eventually constant flow of water, and we would turn one off, do the next one, and it's held for 24 hours so far. So we have water. It's a really poor illustration now, but it was quite nice to have flushing toilets on the first floor of the house again. But here the Apostle Paul is talking about God's power flowing through us. And that's, my friends, how we function as Christians. That's how we ensure that we're not deficient. So there's power above us, there's power within us, and there is power through us. I have got 3 other pages of notes, but I don't feel it's right to go through those today. I'm going to stop there because I think that's enough as we think about God's power this morning. I may weave those in or rejig what I do next week and add something in for September as well. But I've been tremendously excited as I've looked at this passage. Please, 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 would you do me a favour? When you get back home, either today or in the week, just reread verses 14 to 21 of Ephesians chapter 3 and just this passage. Paul was really, really burdened to write to the church in Ephesus and to talk about God's power and talk about the need to be open, to recognise God's power, to have faith and to embrace that power of his. Verses 20 and 21 that we're looking at over these 2 Sundays sum all that up. But this was his prayer. It was his prayer for the Ephesian church, a church he cared deeply about. And it's a prayer for us today, that we too, in the words of verse 16, that out of Christ's glorious riches, that we might be strengthened with power through his Spirit in our inner being. Why? That Christ may dwell in our hearts through faith. I've heard many people say, Kevin, I really struggle with faith. I'm not sure I've really got it. I think what Paul is doing here is making the link. We have to be open to him, to allow him, Christ, to be rooted in us in order for our faith to grow and be strengthened. Reading God's word, fellowship with others, these things are all important, but we have to be open to him as well. Rather than, as I started by saying, almost try to constrain our God to our view of what he should be and when he should be that and how he should be that. Why do I say that? Because to him who is able to do immeasurably more, awesomely awesome, fantastically fantastic, amazingly amazing, more than we ask or imagine according to his power that is work within us. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, and may everyone at Rehoboth say, Amen.